breaking the cycle of reoffending through learning and skills. You'll all be familiar with this document that we published in May last year, jointly between my department, BIS, and Ministry of Justice, with significant input too from the Department for Work and Pensions. It sets out a significant new strategy for offender learning, which we are pressing forward now with implementing. And we had an implementation panel last week, and we concluded, frankly, that we were going quite well on the implementation. We're going to hear later from one of the lead governors who's been heavily involved in the process up till now, and from Iris, who's one of the key officials at the Skills Funding Agency. And that, I think, helps to reinforce the point that Lord Ramsbottom made about the joining up between the departments. This is very much a cross-government agenda, and one where we have to work closely together. And I'd include Department for Education in that as well, in the light of something I'll say a bit later on. But just to reiterate some of the main points from the new strategy, a really big focus on localism. Having heard the feedback through the call for evidence that ministers published as part of the Offender Learning Review, a big feeling that governors wanted to be more involved in the process, have more of a say on what goes on delivering learning in their jails. And a key indicator of that up till now has been the governor involvement in the procurement process, where governors has effectively been in the lead on making the procurement happen and evaluating the bids. Many of you will know that the no award or no preferred bidder was announced for one of the 10 procurement lots. That's the Kent and Sussex one. You might regard that as a bit of a failing of the process. Actually, I regard that as probably quite a good thing. Governors were saying these bids weren't acceptable to us. We aren't going to take someone that doesn't do what we want. We'll re-tender it, and that's what's going on at the moment. So not necessarily a bad thing that a tendering process failed. It shows that the localism, local decision-making, local influence is actually working, I think. Delivery of learning and skills from August will be based on clusters of prisons, which NOMS have led on the design of. Clusters of prisons within which prisoners will move during their sentence, giving significant continuity of the learning that's available throughout those clusters of prisons. A new focus at the beginning of the sentence on English and maths. And as part of that, one of the things that I know Lord Ramsbottom's particularly interested in, the communication issues. We've got the Learning and Skills Improvement Service at the moment working on updating the pack that's made available to tutors in prison that deal with basic skills of maths and English, with a particular emphasis on bolstering the material in there that's about communication skills. So, focus on English and maths, key basic skills at the start of a sentence. Big focus then on vocational skills that are relevant to what employers want in the 12 months or so leading up to release. Where am I? Fourth key thing is redistributing the funding. I think Iris is going to talk about that in a moment or two. And as part of the focus on vocational skills, a big interest in labour market information and what employers really want in the areas to which that cluster of prisons is releasing their prisoners. I'd also mention just a couple of other things as well. Big changes in the way we manage additional learning support for those with learning difficulties and disabilities and supporting them in learning. NOMS is doing a lot of work around the way heads of learning and skills are used in the new cluster arrangements with the lead governors and different ways of distributing the head of learning and skills resource. And going back to something I mentioned a moment ago, we're part of a group that is a joint Youth Justice Board, Ministry of Justice, DFE group that's focusing on the transition between youth justice and the adult justice estate. So we committed in the document that we would do something to make that work more effectively. We are well locked into that process that's going on at the moment. So, John Hayes, as a skills minister, has said a number of times that his aspiration for offender learning is that it should be seen as an authentic part of a skills system. And if you meet him, he does actually use those words, authentic part of a skills system. And a couple of weeks ago, some people here, I know, were at an event that NICE organised. The Princess Royal, who's NICE's patron, was there, which was wholly about offender learning. And it seemed to me that one of the key indicators of that process was the range of mainstream learning organisations that were present at that event and made quite a significant input, particularly during the table discussions that happened. And one of the people that was there was John Vorhaus from the Centre for Education and Criminal Justice System, and that's an introduction that Lord Ramsbottom made to us a few months ago, and very pleased that kind of external interest in data and analysis is being applied to offender learning for, I wouldn't say exactly the first time, but a really intensive interest taken in what's going on at the moment. As the Minister said on the day, the success of the reform set out in here will be judged on how effective they are in making change, and we can only judge that change by having data and analysis that shows us what's going on. I intend to try and leave some space later on in our session for some questions, but I just mention a few things that we talked about in the NIACE event. NIACE had produced a paper which focused on 6 issues that they saw as being important in the development of the offender learning arrangements. I wasn't disconcerted by those six things they chose. It seems to me they are the right 6 things. So if I just say a word about that, because I think that will indicate where our focus will be after we've gone through the immediate activity of appointing new providers and all of that sort of organisation stuff. The first of the 6 things that NIACE identified is about assessment and screening and additional support. Assessing a learner's learning needs is an absolute critical part of the process, and it's the same in any part of an education system. You can't deliver the right thing unless you know what offenders' learning needs are. We're doing a lot of work with NOMS, with the Skills Funding Agency, on assessment and allocation. I'm sure that similar work's going on at cluster level within prisons as well. The thing I'd particularly mention is the National Careers Service, which is going to become part of the scenery within prisons from the 1st of August this year. They'll have a critical role in supporting prisoners in working out what their learning needs are. And particularly importantly for me, I think, because it's part of that mainstream National Careers Service, it'll be a service that operates through the gate both ways. So if what we know about a prisoner in National Careers Service terms before they go into jail should be available when they go into custody, and that should join up when they go out again, though there are data issues in making that work. I've already talked about the new focus on, or the early focus on maths and English skills, and about communications as part of that. I'd just say, again, John Hayes, very clear about the importance of communication skills as part of that process of developing people's basic English skills. Third thing NIACE identified is employability. That focus on employment and employability is a key part of what the Offender Learning Review, the new strategy, does, but it also links very, very closely with the work that MOJ are doing, NOMS are doing around working prisons and employer engagement in that agenda as well. And I'm sure there's lots we can do to make sure that the learning offer supports the working prison process in the same way that mainstream learning supports mainstream employment. I think I'd also add, as part of that, we all think there's more we can do about apprenticeship, and particularly about preparation for apprenticeship within that, to give prisoners on release or as they approach release at least a decent opportunity of having access to apprenticeship opportunities. The fourth thing NIAS identified was the needs of women prisoners. We talked quite a lot about that in the document and in the session that NIAS ran, which happened to be hosted by Women in Prison, actually. We, BIS, fund Women in Prison to provide additional careers advice to women. That's explicitly to augment the National Career Service, not be instead of it. And I'm pretty convinced that the intelligence that comes from that careers advice service that Women in Prison do ought to be part of the set of information which allows lead governors to determine the learning offer in their cluster of prisons where there's a female prison involved. The fifth thing NIAS talked about was raising quality. That was a key issue raised in the call for evidence around the offender learning review. We've made lots of steps over the last 7 or 8 years in improving quality. There's more we can do, and we're going to hear from Jen Walters a bit later on, an Ofsted perspective on how we do more about that. And the last thing NIAS mentioned was the need to ensure a broad curriculum offer. John Hay is very clear in his view that offender learning shouldn't be solely a utilitarian process. Indeed, he'd say the same for all learning, I think. We need to have a broad curriculum offer that both engages and encourages progression. So making available a range of informal learning in custody is a perfectly proper part of what we do through the offender learning arrangements. I'd just perhaps have a caveat that says, so long as we don't take our eye off that main employment prize at the end of the day. I'm timed to finish speaking at 15:15. I think it's about 15:15 now. So thank you for inviting me here this morning. Thank you for listening. I think I'm here for some questions a bit later on.